Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for jumping on to another one of our Wildcat Wisdom online programs. So if you've been on our webinars in the past, you've seen me before. I'm Jamie Weatherby. I'm Associate Director of Alumni Engagement at the University of New Hampshire in the Alumni Relations Office. And I'm thrilled to be joined today with Katie Bouton. She is the founder and CEO of Coyer Leadership Partners. The wonderful part is they've actually shared their space with us today. So my partner behind the scenes, you've heard of her before, Phoebe, and I are here today with Katie and her team in their beautiful Boston office. So thank you so much for hosting us.
Absolutely.
We're thrilled to be here. And I have a whole bunch of things that I want to talk to Katie about to learn more about her and her career path and her leadership skills. But we also want to answer all the questions that you have today. So if you have any questions for Katie at all, please interrupt us. And you can pop your question down into the Q&A feature button that's on the bottom of your screen. You type your question out there. My partner Phoebe, who I mentioned already, will read that question to us so that we can get all the information that you are looking to have out of today's interview. So with that, thank you so much for being here, Katie.
Sure, happy to be here.
I would love just to start off. So I know quite a bit about you at this point from some other times we've met in interviews and things, but you could say it way better than I can. So can you just tell us a little bit about your career path?
Sure.
But as you tell us, one thing that I would love to know is when you were making career moves, how strategic were those moves, or how much of it was kind of taking opportunities as they came?
It was all planned. It absolutely wasn't. I mean, I think that when you're at the stage I'm in my career, you start to see a pattern that you can recreate a story. But in real life, it was really more about just finding the next right thing. So knowing it was time to move on, knowing that I wanted something else, knowing what I was driving towards, and picking the next thing. So for example, I started out as a journalism English major at UNH in College of Liberal Arts and thought I wanted to be a magazine writer. And here I am running a recruiting company. So not exactly a straight line to that.
Great. Well, you just mentioned that you were a journalism major. So if you can take us back to that senior year at UNH, how did that experience with UNH shape the professional you are today? And you kind of just actually mentioned it, but the question was, are you feeling like you are where you expected to be, or how far off that path did you go? It sounds like quite a bit in a lot of ways.
Yes. So I'll take the first question first. My senior year, I was taking, this really happened a little bit earlier than senior year, but I decided to become a women's studies minor. And that was after taking an intro to women's studies class. And I have to say that class sort of blew up my whole plan for who and what I thought I was going to be. And I started taking more and more classes towards that. And so what happened was I realized that I really cared about issues of equal rights and social justice and women in leadership positions. And I just never thought about that before those classes. And once that became the driving force of what I really loved and cared about, it switched a little my trajectory from wanting to exclusively be a magazine writer to wanting to work on those issues all the time and have that be part of my career. So the second question was around, am I where I think I'm going to be?
Yeah. So if you picture yourself as a senior, I think, or even a young alum, right? You have this plan of, I'm trying to go here, and then like happens between that moment and where your destination in mind, and how different was that course for you?
Right. Well, I definitely didn't think as a senior in college that I was going to be a CEO of a company. That really hadn't entered my mind. I think what has changed, what has stayed the same is that I was always really clear that I wanted to make a difference in the world, that I wanted to elevate people whose voices maybe aren't heard traditionally, and that I really was drawn to issues specifically that affect women. And that has been the thread throughout. So that part has stayed. I'm not surprised that I'm running the company I am in terms of our content. We work with nonprofits predominantly, but being a CEO wasn't in the cards senior year.
Well, that's still pretty exciting, right? It sounds like you almost landed a little beyond where you had anticipated.
Yeah, no, it's exceeded my wildest dreams for sure.
Yeah, so that's pretty perfect, absolutely. And sounds like, which is really, I think, one of the beauties of a liberal arts degree, right? Is you got a chance to explore some of those things that maybe on a different path in college you wouldn't have touched on.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely. I mean, I credit UNH with that. In a way, at the time, it was really confusing because I wanted to be the kind of person who knew exactly what they were doing when they got out of college. And liberal arts sort of shows you there's a lot of different ways to approach problems and who you're going to become. And I'm really grateful for that because it's made for a good career.
absolutely. So what exactly drove you to start Hoya Leadership Partners? Do you feel like your experience with that was really the mission that got you here? Or did you always envision yourself as an entrepreneur and then that idea and that topic kind of fit with that drive and that's what drove you? So the entrepreneurial piece or the mission, and then you just happened to stumble upon entrepreneurship to make that mission happen?
For me, it was definitely mission. And I came up with something to do that fit the mission I was trying to become and to live. The more I started working in nonprofits right out of college, and then I worked at a couple for-profit companies, and I did human resources and organizational development. And it seemed to me that the people who had the biggest levers for change were the leaders. And when I looked around at the leaders were predominantly white and male, and that seemed odd to me. And I thought, well, if you can start to change the face and the type of leaders that you see, then you can really affect a lot of change. And so I started thinking about the industries where that's possible. And one of them is recruiting, because you're placing leaders all day long.
Yeah, that's great. So it's interesting you say that. So one of the things that I think is really challenging for I want to say either other women that are young in their careers or in college right now, trying to put themselves in the position of a leader, that it's easier to do something when you see an example of it being done. And unfortunately, the reality is today, there's still more male leaders with little diversity compared to, you know, being able to have a female leader as a role model. So did you have strong female role models that kind of helped you? This is a curveball. I didn't cut you with it. I'm sorry. Now I'm curious. So is there somebody, or did you have that face of a person that you could kind of model yourself after? Or did you kind of blaze the trail kind of on your own?
I mean, my first role model was my mother, who ran her own business and who was a leader.
She came from an entrepreneur.
I did, and before that, she was an administrator and you know, good at coordinating large groups of people. And so I certainly learned a lot from her about basically the kind of person I wanted to be and the kind of leader by watching her solve problems at her organizations that she worked at. But I was lucky to work for a couple women. I worked at a company called Children First, and I was their HR manager. And the woman who founded that company, which has now been sold, was 28 when she started her company. And she was 44, maybe my age, when she sold it.
Wow.
And I was lucky enough to be there at the time when she was still inviting young staff into her office and asking their ideas and their opinions. And I was, you know, very young, and she didn't care. She modeled, like, everybody has an idea and an opinion, and I want to hear it. And I really admired her and what she did. And so she was a great role model for me.
Are you guys still in touch today?
We are not, and you know, she doesn't live very far from here. So I've been thinking it's time. I've probably reached the stage of life where I need to write a few thank yous. And just say, hey, look at what you created.
Yeah, you can send her the recording of this webinar.
Yes.
Like, I was thinking about you today. It was recorded. Yeah, absolutely. That's really funny. Well, then, how long, just out of curiosity, how long were you working before you thought to launch your own business? If she was 28, that's really young to have ventured into that space.
Yes. So I actually started my company at 28. It was not, didn't correlate it at the time. So I had been probably working 7 years.
Wow. So when you say you started, was it this company, or did you, I didn't know you were a serial entrepreneur.
No, I'm not a serial. I don't believe I'm a serial entrepreneur. I'll let you know in another decade, but.
Funny. That's a good point. Yeah. There's still much more to come.
I was 28, and that is young to start, and it's predominantly young because you have to prove to people that you can do things that you sort of get by age. You know, you get credibility with age sometimes.
Yeah. Well, yeah, sometimes, right? Depending on how you age.
Yeah,
exactly. How you handle yourself.
Yeah,
that's really funny. Awesome. We have a question from online.
You mentioned in the beginning that part of your path was knowing when it was time to move on. What indicators do you look for to know that it was time to make a move to a different place or path?
That's a really good question. I think we spend a lot of our day at work. And so if you're bored and you're waking up and you're kind of dragging yourself to work, not on a cold, snowy day on a Wednesday when you wish you could stay home, but sort of every day, and you're not inspired, then it's time to figure out why. Or if you feel like you've done everything you can at the organization, I think then you know it's time to move on. But I'm a constant grower, learner. I love to learn. And so if you're bored, to me, that's a strong indicator that there has to be somewhere else to experiment with or another new place to try.
That was a great question. Thanks for the person who asked it. Oh, we have more questions. Let's just go keep those going.
Launching your own business can feel really intimidating. How did you know when you were ready, or did you ever feel ready?
No, absolutely not. I never felt ready, and many days I still don't feel ready. I think being ready is the wrong measure. I think when you feel as if you can't do anything else, that this is the thing you have to do, then you just have to try. It's a myth that people are ready. I don't believe Bill Gates was ready. I don't think Sheryl Sandberg was ready. I think people just make the leap and do it.
So on the heels of that, how do you, I feel like when, especially if you're feeling not super ready in the moment, but you do it anyway, right? Go with fear, not without it. How do you, when you hit that moment, like how do you overcome the self-doubt or the fear around that? Like when you're like, I don't know if I'm making this up right now, and I know I'm making this up. Like how do you overcome that self-doubt to be able to drive to the level that you're at? You must have to overcome some of those pieces.
Yes, absolutely. I think for me, I've learned, so I'm about 15, almost 16 years into this business, and risk taking is a muscle. So you learn to just get comfortable.
Never heard it described that way. Risks. That's a great like visual analogy. I love that.
You can practice it, and then it's just less scary because you know how to do it the way you know how to brush your teeth. Yeah. So you spend less, the time you're spending obsessing about, is it the right move and should I do it, sort of widows down to, it's a smaller amount of time that you spend before you're like, okay, let's just try it. And so I think that's what I've gotten good at is just flexing that muscle.
That's awesome. Very cool. So then do you feel like as you were navigating the waters, is there a time where it sounds like it feels like it goes great until something goes wrong, and then it's easy to panic and be like, oh God, I made a mistake here. Yeah. Can you tell us about a time that maybe something didn't go right the way that you had intended it to go? Sure. And how you overcame that?
Sure. I mean, that happens a lot, maybe once a week. Yeah. And again, it's another muscle that you learn. You're like, okay, I tried that and it didn't work. And if it didn't work and it failed miserably, then you apologize and you own it and you try to ask people around you what could you have done better, and you try not to make that same mistake again. But I think as an entrepreneur, as a leader, you do make mistakes all the time.
So two people asked kind of the same question. Okay. So how do you manage the risk and their subsequent changes as both business owner and manager to people as a leader?
How do I manage the risks?
Yes.
Meaning that sometimes being a business owner and a leader are at conflict with each other, I presume.
Yes.
Managing the people and managing the business. Mm-hmm. It's a constant tension, and I think over time I have realized that if you run the business well and you focus on what the business needs, then it becomes very clear to everyone that works with you what the decisions will be and why they're good for the business. And as much as possible, you try to align that with what is good for people. And that's usually easy when the people are really in alignment with what the business needs. And it makes it also really easy when it's time, you know, when you have a person who isn't what the business needs, they probably don't need the business either.
Great. More questions.
How do you inspire, or what advice do you have for young women who are looking for a leadership role in their career?
That's a great question.
Yeah. I mean, my first the problem with these interviews is that you end up sounding kind of trite sometimes, but I mean, just go for it. Look for other leaders and mentors. Don't be afraid to self-promote. Don't be afraid to look for opportunities where you might have to work late, or you might have to work on the weekend, or it might not be part of your job description, but you know, people will notice that. And pay attention to what kind of leader you like. What are you drawn to about those leaders? And then go find that kind of leader, as opposed to just that leader in a certain job that you're aspiring to. Go for their qualities first.
So we work with students and young alums. One of the things that I coach a lot of people on is building those relationships and those networks. And we've learned a lot, and I would want to know a little bit about if mentorship played a role in your professional success. And on the heels of that, we've learned that mentorship has turned into, it's got a connotation. The word is challenging for some people, where either in the role of the mentee, people hang on to their mentor for dear life because they think that one person can, guide them on their path. But as a mentor, people are like, I don't know if I'm ready to mentor you, if I have the time, if I feel qualified. So we've kind of tried to be coaching to this idea of, you get this board of directors, and you have a bunch of people that you can take pieces of their information, and it's not just one person. So it sounds like you really have lived that and really just sought out the advice of the people that you've seen. Have you feel like those mentors have played a big role, or?
Most of my mentors have been more role models than mentors. So they're people I aspire to be, or I like their qualities, or I admire them. And that goes from my mother to the woman I work for and a bunch of, other people. But I haven't had a lot of luck personally with finding a mentor. I've had a lot more luck with saying, hey, I really like how that person is authentic. I like how they lead their company. I like how their employees talk about their company. I want to meet that person. And just sending them an email and saying exactly that has been very fruitful.
With the email, have you found that you get a lot of positive responses to that?
Yeah. Women in particular are so generous with their time, and they want to help other young women succeed. And I'm not saying men are not. I've seen plenty that are, but women really do it all the time. And so you'd be surprised who you get a response from if you email them. Awesome. And especially if you don't take up a ton of their time and you just ask them a couple quick questions, it works.
Yeah, we, again, to the points that we coach on, that's always when we say to people, they're like, I don't know anyone in that industry, or I don't know anyone in the company. I always say, like, right now, but you could meet them, and all you have to do is, research them on LinkedIn or find them and reach out. Worst thing that happens is they don't respond, and you're no worse off for it. But best case, they do respond, and you get to build that relationship, which is, the key to success most of the time is, who you know, not what you know, in a lot of ways. So.
And I found a lot of role models through podcasts and reading books and going to conferences and listening to speakers. So maybe I didn't have access to the person I was really emulating, but I could listen to the content of what they were trying to share. And so that's also a really good way to learn and have a mentor that you don't actually know.
Right. That's great. So then when you, looking back, do you feel like you always saw yourself as a leader? Is that a position that you had mentally put yourself in, or did you really feel like you had to cultivate those skills and grow into that space?
Well, I definitely feel as if I'm cultivating those skills every day. It's one of the best parts about running a business is you never know what's coming next, and you are constantly out of your element. And so you have to learn and grow. But I mean, in hindsight, I was always a leader. I was the person in the group that always got stuck pulling off the project. I was good at making decisions, good at getting people to come together around something. But for me, it was never about being the leader. It was always about getting something done or making a change. And it's a little bit different than sitting down when you're 8 and saying, I want to run the world. That isn't really how it worked for me.
That's great. Yeah, I think that that's totally true, right? It sounds like that's really aligned with your mission-driven self, where you grow into a leader because you're really so passionate about driving the mission, and then you attract all the right people to support the mission, which seems like the way that you build such a strong team, such a strong business.
Absolutely.
And I think we have another question from online.
You mentioned informal mentors and the importance of finding people who inspire you. Who are some of your role models?
I have lots of corporate role models. I admire some of what Sheryl Sandberg does because she's in such a male-dominated industry, which I think is really amazing. I admire Nancy Pelosi because she is, at the height of her career and navigating a lot of different stakeholders and looking fabulous doing it, and handling them, everyone so calmly. I admire a lot of really young leaders. We work with a lot of social justice organizations, and those are being run by really amazing women and women of color in their 20s. And so there's several of those that I really admire. So those are some of them.
Thanks. So in preparation for our interview, I did come across, I was reading a report. It's a 2019 Kingsley Lean-In report. So it's a report all about women in the workplace, basically.
Yes.
And there's a whole bunch of things that came out of that, and a couple things I would just love to know your reaction to. So given that, being a female leader, you're in that top tier, you're in the minority because there's more male leaders in general. So one of the quotes, and I'm going to read it just so that I don't get it wrong, is I would say I received a fraction of the opportunities, so this is a quote of somebody who had done the survey, of the opportunities that I would have had as a white man. The ones I did receive, I had to fight really hard for. I've seen many white men groomed for leadership. That didn't happen for me. I literally had to kick down doors. Do you feel like you had to do some kicking down doors in your experience, or was that kind of aligned with what happened for you, or did you have a different path?
Yeah. Yes, I did. I absolutely did have to kick down doors. I mean, I'm a white woman and there's privilege inherent in that as well. So it is not as difficult for me as it is for many other women of color. But I will say that I definitely had to kick down some doors. Predominantly for me, it was around access to capital and being taken seriously as a business owner. So in the beginning, I was really young, so there was some ageism there. Then I went and started a business that was a for-profit business focused on nonprofit causes and also a services business, which in the world of finance and venture capital and funding for business is like low on the total, low on the pole. So I think for me, what I realized was that I was going to have to prove that this was a viable business that couldn't turn a profit before anyone would invest in me. So I definitely had some experiences getting turned down for capital. Had to raise it myself, on credit cards.
Did you do a lot of the raises? So in terms of funding your business when you launched, was it pretty much self-funded before you got the traction?
It was absolutely self-funded, and by self-funded, I mean we made enough every month to go for another month for quite a while. And then about 4 years in, I got turned down by several banks just for a line of credit and a very small line of credit. And then finally, there was a loan officer at a local bank who took a chance on me. That was after I'd been told by the competing bank that I should go home and ask my husband for the money.
Oh,
so
wow.
And this was 2000, maybe 6 or 7, so it was a long time ago, but not a really long, not the 1800s.
Oh, that just blew my mind. Sorry, I showed on my face. I can't believe that's the response you got.
To be honest, I was so angry. I went right to the competitor and told them what had happened, and that loan officer said, "We're going to get you this line of credit."
Well, and I think there's such a great value point, especially when it comes to funding.
Right.
I think one thing that I've learned from speaking to other folks that have tried to access that, that it's almost kind of subjective in a lot of ways. Like you really can just you can ask 5 different people and get 5 different answers, and
absolutely,
it's just interesting that that's how that works.
Yeah.
But I can't believe that's what they said to you.
Absolutely. It is really interesting how that world works.
Yeah, and I think that, whether women in leadership or women own business or, in general, I think that speaks a lot to advocating for yourself, and not no doesn't always mean no across the board. It means that you just need to ask someone else the question, or a different question, same question in a different way, or something like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Geez, gosh, that's terrible. I'm sorry. But clearly you have arrived where you are, so it all worked itself out. Well, that's crazy.
We did certainly that loan officer has eaten his words since.
Yes.
Let's just put it that way.
Exactly. So again, from the same report, another thing that they had talked about is the difference between men and women. And I think we hear this a lot where, you know, if a woman's bossy, but a man's assertive. You know, you think in that sentiment of the dichotomy of needing to be really liked as a female, and if you're not, then you're, you know, the B word or whatever.
Right.
Whereas you're just, you know, the boss if you're a man, and there's that stigma. How have you navigated those waters to try to be able to be assertive in your career and, you know, the boss in your career and toe that line? So it's a tough line to toe.
It is. I guess I thought about this question, but I never paid a lot of attention to all that chatter. I just figured if I was who I was, and that was generally a decent, authentic person, that people would sort of fall off to the wayside. So the people that thought I was the B word, or the people that thought I was too aggressive, or I talked too much, or I was too emotional, or whatever it was, then they were just the people that I didn't need around me. And so they sort of disappear after a while if you don't pay them any mind.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense, right? If you're just you, then you attract all the right people,
Right.
and those are the only people you want to attract anyway.
Right. And sometimes people you really want to be attracted won't be. And that just happens.
It's just life. Yeah. It's just part of the process.
It is.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, and I think that maybe this is a little bit of a different sentiment because you're in the role of the business owner, and you have been for quite some time.
Yes.
But it is said, and I would love, maybe through the lens of your employees, let's think about it like that, that a man who is recently promoted will spend about 80% of his time doing that job and 20% of his time self-promoting and networking for the next opportunity. Whereas women will put in 120% focusing on their current job. How do you see that play out? Maybe, I want to say maybe in your staff, but how do you work on self-promotion maybe as a female to be able to, you know, do your job 120% while also self-advocating, I think is maybe the better, so the perfect balance of those things, right?
Right. And I love this question. I think, so our staff range in age from right out of college to 70. So we have a huge age range and variability on our team. And I would say that people my age and older, that statistic holds true for me around self-promotion. I would say under my age, I don't see a problem necessarily with self-promotion. I think young women are way better at that now, and I'm really glad for that. The one thing that I do see consistent across age, including with young people, is a sort of clarifying statements and justification. So instead of just going in and saying, I have worked really hard, and here are the 3 things I've done, and here's been the outcome and the impact, and I think I deserve a raise, let's say. They'll say, I'm not trying to be arrogant, and I don't want you to think that I'm not a hard worker, but I really think I need a raise. And the problem for me in that is that you don't need to tell me that. I don't think you're arrogant because you're good at your job. If you're good at your job, I know, because I can see the impact. But it undercuts the message when you want people to also think you're a good person. Women do that all the time, and they often apologize for salary. That's another area we haven't seen a change.
Yeah.
So someone will say to me, well,
I'm working on that personally, so I'm with you.
I'm sorry, I'm not greedy, and money's not important to me. And so you could ask anyone in this office, I always stop them and say, money is important to everybody. That is why we are working, part of the reason. So step back and tell me why you think you would like an increase, and let's talk about it. But you don't have to apologize, and you don't have to assure me that you're not greedy, because I already know that, because you work here and I know the quality of your work.
It's great advice. It's really good advice. It is definitely self-advocating. I think for whoever you are is tough, especially that salary negotiation piece or asking for a raise always feels like touchy, but you're right. It's all how you approach it, and undercutting yourself with the I'm sorry, but isn't really a good strategy.
And women are trained for people to like them. you know, to go along, to get along. They want people to like them. And in those situations, you know, it's a business discussion. So treat it as if it's a business discussion.
Definitely. So let's talk a little bit about your path growing your business. Have you had a specific decision that you've made that you feel like changed it all for you? Was there a moment in your path where you're like, thank God I made that one choice, because that was the choice that kind of made the difference?
I mean, much like a career or a life in general, there isn't, I don't think there's really just one choice, but there definitely was a moment where I had to decide, did I want to be a consultant running a really lovely small business where essentially I was selling the work and I was delivering the product as well. And that's a really good business for a lot of people. And I probably spent 2 years thinking about, did I want that, or did I want something more bigger in scale? And what I did was sit and ask all my advisors and my husband and my friends, my UNH college roommates, and try to figure out, well, what did I really love about what I did? And what I loved was growing and scaling something. So that meant that running a consulting business just for me was going to, in the end, be boring. And as I said, I don't like to be bored. And so that's when I went for it. And there is a real decision point in a business where you have to decide that.
So in that tipping point for you, how big was your business at that time, staff-wise, location-wise? Because you have now multiple locations, good size staff.
Yes, so we were about $1 million in revenue, which had been a target goal for me for a long time. And you know, that took probably 9 years. I mean, it took a long time. Yeah. And I also had 2 children during that time, and there were other things happening that slowed down the growth a little bit. And we had about 13 people, and now we're at about 85, 90, and we're at 20 million this year.
Wow,
so
congratulations, that's amazing.
It's grown a lot in the last 6 years.
Okay, so you were 9 to get to that point where you had that tipping point, and then another 6 about to be where you are. And how recent has this office been open? I mentioned this earlier, but we're in Boston right now. This is not your headquarters or your main hub, right?
No. We don't really have a main hub. I mean, we were started as a virtual company, so people worked from home, they worked from WeWork spaces. Because we knew that we wanted to have as much of a diverse staff as we could, and we wanted to go where the talent was, that meant I didn't worry about where you lived, as long as you could get on an airplane if you needed to. So we've had this space about a year. And we have locations in DC and Chicago and New York and LA and San Francisco and Nashville and a whole bunch of other places.
Wow. So what made you go from being strictly virtual to having these office spaces? What was the motivation there?
Well, one of the reasons for here was it was just a dream to have an office in Boston, and
a dream space. We've been building work since we got here. So.
And it turned out that a lot of my younger staff, when you first start working, you know, working from home's not that exciting. Like, you're by yourself in your yoga pants, and that feels probably a lot like college. And so a lot of the younger staff were saying, please, can we have an office where we can be with each other and have happy hour and do networking things? And so that was the other driving force.
Oh yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. What is your experience? So I feel like managing, for some of those points that you just said, managing remote staff versus managing an in-house staff must be 2 different animals. How did you, especially with your remote staff, I'd say, because I think that's becoming much more sought after and common to have people in remote locations. What was managing those people like, and how did you keep those folks motivated and feeling connected to the company?
You know, for us, because at first we were all virtual, I think that leveled the playing field in the beginning. We also use technology incessantly. So we are on Slack all the time. Before it was Slack, it was instant message. We do all of our meetings. Even a quick call is usually a Zoom video call, so you can see someone.
Makes all the difference.
Which makes
see the person.
A huge difference. We do a lot of in-person meetings. Recruiters travel a lot, so there's a lot of time to connect. But I think what made it possible was being really deliberate about how we use technology, and sort of mandating the video piece, you know, saying whenever possible, try to see the face. People do virtual lunchtime, you know, they all eat lunch together, but they're in 6 different states.
That's really cute though. That's great.
And people love that, and Slack has helped a lot with that. But I think what really helped is everyone was very clear about our mission.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone knows why they come to work at Koya.
And then with that, did you, with the virtual lunches and things like that, did you build in a component where you all gathered for, say, you know, I want to say conference, but like a once a week kind of thing, or I mean, once a week for a week, like once a year?
Yeah.
Did you pull everyone together in that time, or?
Yeah. Well, we would never do a week because people
that's
don't like to be away from their lives for a week by and large, no matter how much they like their job.
Right.
But we have done sort of annual meetings or every other year meetings. We've tried virtual retreats, you know, we do a lot of things like that. And again, because of travel, it's sort of company culture that if you're traveling to a city where we have Koya staff to visit a client, that you stop by that office and you say hi and use that opportunity.
Awesome. Yeah. I think we have a question from
We have a couple of questions.
Awesome.
So first we have a shout out that someone wanted to just let you know that you are a warrior goddess. Thank you for your focus on positive value and worth. Period. Smiling face.
Thank you.
That's from one person.
I'm going to take that home with me tonight with my 7,000 emails and my math homework with my 12-year-old.
I personally found
Yeah, that's great.
one person asked, what skills do you utilize to be a great leader and role model for the employees in your company?
Also a great question.
Okay. I think I've already said it, but I think just be authentic. Like when I first started, I thought there was a rule book. I thought that if I just read enough books and listened to enough podcasts, that I would get it right eventually. And then I figured out that nobody has any idea what they're doing. And once I figured that out, you know, once I realized that the 44-year-old I was looking at then had no idea, I was like, oh, that's really liberating, because that means there's no right way to make a decision. So what I try to do is always tell the truth, be kind, be fair, and be honest. If somebody's doing a bad job, and this has been hard for me to learn, but be honest, like tell them and tell them why, like give them the respect to be honest. And then I think if you love what you do, people like to see that. So that's infectious and it catches fire.
And then the last question I have right now, can you talk a little bit about what initially sparked your company mantra, the right person in the right place can change the world?
To be really honest, it was me and my only other employee who was part-time at her kitchen table trying to come up with the way we wanted the company to feel. And when we really got right down to it, we knew that we wanted to place leaders that changed the world. And we also knew that if we did it right, that the people who worked at Koya would feel that way too about their job. So there was no fancy marketing person behind that. There were just 2 women sitting at a kitchen table with a lot of coffee and some very small kids screaming in the background, trying to figure out, you know, at our essence and our core, what is it we were trying to do.
So in your path of growing Koya, what was one thing that you had to do that was way outside your comfort zone? And I know you mentioned that that's a muscle that you can train.
Yeah.
But I'm sure that there is a point where there was like, oh, this feels like, you know, I'm doing this anyway. Was there a moment like that for you where, you know, you had to really push past your personal comfort zone to get to where you are?
Yeah, every day.
Yeah.
Every day. But I'll go with the most recent, which is that we recently decided to join Diversified Search Group, which is a group of companies. And that meant going through the whole sale process of the company and figuring out, did I want to exit or did I want to join the new thing? And going through due diligence and working with private equity guys and bankers and brokers and learning all kinds of terminology and negotiating on behalf of my company. So I would say for a solid 6 months, I was as far outside of my comfort zone as one could get. Liberal arts major, not a finance major. You know, it was the best decision I ever made because it's allowed me to continue to grow and scale the business that I love, while also learning new things.
Mhm.
And I think if I hadn't taken that risk, Koya would have continued on, but there wouldn't be as much opportunity for people to grow and change here.
Do you have a question?
Yes. As a young alumna starting her career in the HR space, what is your best advice for thinking about a long-term career? Where do you see the future of HR?
I think the future of HR has changed unbelievably in my career. It is very much a strategic business partner, and that is what you want to be. And what that means is that you have to understand how decisions get made. And in a corporation, decisions get made based on profit. So you better learn to read a balance sheet. You better learn to understand budgeting, to understand how people make decisions around the finances is really critical, because the minute you do that, then you can turn every HR problem, situation, every resource you need into a business case with a value proposition. These are words I did not know when I started HR. And they're actually words I didn't learn in my HR degree, but that would be different now. So I would say learn as much as you can about the business, take an online boot camp course on how to read financials, take any class you can find or podcast on strategic business partner in HR, because the world has finally woken up to the fact that without employees, there are no businesses. And that means that the HR person needs to be at the table. So look for companies where that's the case. And if you see HR regulated to some administrative mid-level function, then that's not the company you want to work at, because they don't care about people.
So definitely, especially with your staffing perspective, I would love to know, this is another male to female kind of a thing, where a lot of times, so if a woman jumps on a job board and sees a job description, she's looking to make sure she's checking all the boxes. And she, has said, I did this, I did this, I did this. So I feel qualified to apply for that job. On the other end of the spectrum, more often when men look at job descriptions, they'll say, I have this, I don't really have that, I have that, I don't have that one either, but I can learn those things. So as long as a male typically hits about 70%, they're like, let's go for it. And then because they put themselves out there for those opportunities, a lot of times they get those stretch jobs more than maybe if you stayed within the, I can check every box, so it's harder to grow that way. Have you found that in the work that you've done, and how have you coached women to kind of go outside their comfort zone or to stretch themselves and apply to roles that they feel like they don't check every box for?
Right. I definitely still see that happening, although less and less. So I think that's good.
Yeah.
I think the research will shift in 10 years, but I definitely still see it. And of course, my advice would be just go for it, because you've got nothing to lose and lots to gain. And your male counterparts are not sitting there wondering if they have every little bullet on some too long job description. At Koya, what I try to do is show rather than tell. So when I see someone that I think is exhibiting leadership skills, instead of saying, I think you'd be a great leader, or a great manager, I'll say, hey, I saw you do that in that meeting, and that was really leadership quality work. And maybe try that again in the next meeting, and see if you can get someone else next to you to also try to do that. And so we spend more time coaching and showing them where they're already a leader than trying to convince them. Because if you can give real examples, it takes it out of the perception or the feeling of, am I really a leader? And am I really qualified for this? To more like, well, my boss is saying that she saw me do it.
Yeah. So that's interesting you say that. So there's also something I've heard quite a bit, which is the imposter syndrome, right?
Yes.
When you get into this role and it's your role, that's your job now, but you're like, I hope they don't find out that I'm not qualified to be sitting in the seat I'm sitting in. How did you feel like that? And then how do you, for yourself, but then your female staff, like how do you, or male staff, whoever, how do you coach them through, if you're sitting in the seat, own the seat, it's your seat,
Right. Again, I just try to reflect back what I'm seeing. So you can't argue with facts. If you're in the same meeting and you explain that you saw someone be a leader and not an imposter, people tend to be able to hold on to that more than just a blanket statement like I see a leader. And yes, I felt like an imposter as a parent, as a friend, as a CEO. I think that's a common feeling for anybody who's trying to be good at something.
Right.
But as I've said already, once you realize that we're all walking around like we're maybe 10, 11, 12 years old inside, you start to realize that a lot of the behavior that you're seeing, you saw in 6th and 7th grade, and that we're all just kind of figuring it out. So we're all imposters in a way. And that freed me up a huge amount.
Absolutely. Well, I think that the feeling of an imposter makes you feel almost, you assume everyone else feels like they're in the right place. You're just the one out of place. So it is really freeing to be like, no one feels like they're in the right place. It's fine.
Ask someone sometime.
So,
like ask one of those people you admire. Did you always feel absolutely,
or do you even right now
sure of yourself, or do you right this second? And I guarantee most of the women anyways will admit that they don't feel 100% sure all the time.
No, absolutely. So as you were growing, what was the best advice that you've ever received, either as a female leader or in your business? Just kind of.
There's no perfect. So waiting for something to be perfect, your resume, your career, your business decision, just isn't going to happen. You just have to get as much information as you feel you need, and then you just have to call it and hope that it's right, and when it's not, move on to the next decision. But there isn't a perfect answer out there about how to run a business or how to have a career. So
what about, again, especially because you're in a unique role to have work with so many people in their careers, if someone starts down a path and then they feel like, I got out of college and I started down this road, but it's not perfect for me and I want to make a pivot. How do you coach folks to make a pivot in their career and maybe advocate for themselves and promote themselves when they haven't done that exact job and it doesn't feel like that perfect stepping stone?
I encourage a lot of people, it depends on their time, how much time they have, but I'll encourage people to join a board, to do a special project for somebody. So say, when I first got into HR, I actually was working as a sort of an events manager, communications writer for a bioscience company. And the HR person, I went to her and said, I admired her. So I went to her and said, I like what you do. Is there any project I could do that you're not getting done? And she was, yes. And so I did it at nights on the weekends. And eventually when she had an opening, she hired me out, and that launched my career. So I think being willing to just go to the person whose job you find interesting and saying, I don't have much experience in this, but here's what I bring to the table. And do you have any extra work lying around that I can help with? Most people say yes.
Awesome. So then now also being in your role as leading your company, you've done quite a bit of hiring on your own, I'm sure, over the years.
Yes.
What is it that you specifically look for in your new hires?
I look for people that know why they go to work every day. So if they can answer for me what gets them up in the morning, what lights them up. Like I ask a question, when you had a really great day at work, what's happened? And when you had a really
great question.
bad day at work, what's happened?
Yeah.
And if they can't answer, then they're probably not, they're not ready to work at a mission-driven organization, because they won't be motivated by it, because they don't yet know what they're motivated by. So I look for that. I look for hard work. I look for someone who asks good questions and kind of pushes ideas forward. Are some of the things.
Yeah, no, those are great. Those are great things. It's true about the mission-driven part. That if you can't articulate what makes a bad day, it's hard to really know what fuels a really good day. Those kind of go back and forth, right?
Right. Definitely.
So then, what advice? I asked what the best advice you've ever received is. What would be the key advice that you would give to somebody? Let's say we'll go two paths, that's trying to build themselves as a leader, and then the other one is starting a business.
I would say building yourself as a leader, ask for feedback all the time. So open the door, and as you get to be more of a leader, people give you less and less feedback. And so
That's
constantly
interesting.
open the door
Yeah.
to say, how am I doing as CEO? Do you like what I'm doing? Do you think I'm bad at it? Where could I improve? Because that will keep you constantly learning and identifying weaknesses.
How do you get people to be comfortable enough to give you critical feedback? I feel like even if you open that door when you own the company, it's hard to give that person that feedback.
I think if you establish a culture of transparency and collaboration, then people will do it. You know, of course, the feedback I get is behind a little bit of a curtain, I think. But I think people also, there are brave people who will just say so. And I almost always take the feedback and agree with it. And it's usually a blind spot that I didn't see. So as a leader, I would say constantly be asking for that feedback and identify. I set sort of a goal every year, you know, 1 year everyone laughs at me, but I had a sticky on my computer that said, say the hard thing, because I was having a really hard time giving constructive feedback and not hurting people's feelings. And it just irritated me. So I told everybody I was working on it, and they would help me say the hard thing when they would see me start talking too much. So that's on the leadership side. And on the business owner side, I would say, you know, look for the people that inspire you and see what the common trends are, and then go build a good informal board of directors that can cheer you on, and just go do it. There's no magic. There's just a lot of hard work.
Absolutely. So then we're heading into, and I can't believe it, the holidays. And then 2020, which I feel like a milestone just in itself. But the new year always is. Do you have, what is next for you or heading into 2020 with Koya? What are your goals for your business at this stage?
Well, we're very early days in our new group that we're working with. So I'll be spending a lot of time helping build culture at the new search group, and helping make sure that the company here is still running well. And then, so that's most of what I'll be doing. And then we'll be spending, you know, personally, I'll be spending time reading as many books as possible, because that's what I do. I'm an English major at heart.
Yeah. Actually, I thought of another question I wanted to ask you. We, as a leader, and I know you grow over time, make mistakes over time, learn from those mistakes. How has your leadership style changed? Maybe say from that, you know, 9-year marker where you had that tipping point to now.
I think I've gotten much better. In the beginning, I spent a lot of time worrying that people were happy and that they liked me. And now I care that we're fair and we're clear, and I hope they're happy. But happiness for employees is a big thing that not a workplace can't solve. So I try to be very clear about what Koya can offer and what it can't, and a little less worried about, you know, whether people like me or not. It's more important to me that they like what they do and they like who they work with.
Yeah. How do you handle it if you feel like you have somebody that isn't a great fit on your team? How have you coached them through to either fix that, or how do you handle that?
Yeah. We're very, very good at moving people, playing to people's strengths. So we move people around a lot. When we have to, we coach people out. And when we do that as fairly and kindly as possible. And 90% of the time, it's better for them and for us, and then they go on to find something, you know, wonderful that they like to do. But if you're clear, then it's kind of obvious that it's not a good fit.
Absolutely. And then when we talk about your 2020 goals, but your future goals, I know originally you mentioned that the growth was really a driver for you in building. Do you still have strong aspirations to grow beyond your 85-person team? Do you think that you still are in that growth mindset, or have you plateaued on you in a good way, where you're, you know, you've leveled out and you're like, this is the size that we want to be at, and leave it there?
No, I think growth is a state of being for me. So I think as long as we feel as if the quality of the work is high and we're still making an impact, we will continue to grow.
It's awesome. Into new cities and new locations?
New cities and new locations and new areas of the business.
Great. Yeah. And I think we have another question from online.
Do you have books and podcasts you recommend as we continue to grow in our careers?
Yes, I do. How I Built This is a really good podcast. I think there's a bunch of Fortune business women podcasts that you can Google where they interview really famous people. It's a little dorky, but I love Super Soul Sunday podcast, not the show, but the podcast with Oprah, because she gets the most amazing speakers, and there's a lot to learn about leadership in the people that she gets. Books, I love an old book called Good to Great by Jim Collins, and another book, Anything by Simon Sinek. It starts with why, is really good.
I just finished Leaders Eat Last. Have you read that one of his? So good.
He's so good, and he's got tons of TED Talks and online things you can watch. And then the final thing I'd say is that there's a publication that it's a daily publication that comes in your email called The Broadsheet. And it compiles a lot of the major headlines around women in leadership that come out every day, and big studies and cool editorials, and it's worth reading.
So I didn't mention this before, but if you've been on our webinars before, we always record these. So we have a recording of all those that you just listed. So I will do my best to find them all, or else I'll reach out to you maybe for your help with those.
Right.
But we'll put them in a follow-up email so that you can check them out if you didn't get those written down, because those are really, really great advice. And like you said, there's a lot of ways to get advice and mentors. They don't necessarily need to be someone sitting next to you. They can be a podcast or from a book.
Absolutely.
So those sound like really amazing resources.
Yeah.
We are coming down to the end of our webinar, so if anyone has any last questions, now would be the time. But one of my last question for you is I wanted to know a little bit about how the folks that are on the webinar or can support, follow, or have a pulse of what you're doing in the future.
Sure. So we're on all the traditional social media channels, which I think you'll share links of. But if you're interested in what we do, or the kind of openings that we recruit for, both at Koya and with our client organizations, at our website, there's a talent network. And when you go in and log in, you can log in and then you can pick all the things you're passionate about and that you want to do in the world. And we keep that on file, and you'll start getting listings from of jobs that might match what you really care about.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, with that, we're going to launch a poll just to have a sense of, if there's anything that we can do to improve our programs. We ask that every time. So, but we are on our journey of our Women in Leadership webinar series. So we have a couple more coming up. Those will be in the follow-up email as well. But thank you so much for your time, for your hospitality. You've been wonderful, and amazing advice, and it's so great to hear right from somebody who was a COLA student, and now running a multi-million-dollar business is invaluable information. So thank you so much for everything.
Sure. Thanks for having me.